not invalidating their experience. So if they're saying something, and this is, one of my most passionate things to talk about, is how when we don't agree with someone, we tend to, we get on this lawyer mode, right? We want to convince the other person of our viewpoint. And what happens is both people are only trying to convince the other person, and no one's really listening or trying to understand where the other's coming from. Right. So these are really, small ways that we can build our relationships. One of the, what I call the 30-second or the 60-second secret to turning around a relationship, again, is to show appreciation for things that the other person is doing right. What happens, and again, taking a parenting example, if I walk into the kitchen and my kids have been baking, right, and I see that the counter is got 3 or 4 things lying on it, what am I likely to notice? I'm going to likely notice, oh, they haven't washed the pan, the one sticky spoon is lying there, right? What I'm not noticing is the fact that they've actually put a few things in the dishwasher and they have tried to clean up at least a little bit, right? And one of the secrets of making any relationship work is actually to focus on what the other person is doing right, rather than only focusing when they slip up. So those are just some ideas.
One of my favorite resources that I use for this topic specifically when clients come in and talk about their relationships is the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Mm-hmm. It's the pop culture type of book that we have, but I read it from cover to cover and found it so profound in how the therapist talks about different emotional needs, the different languages that we use, how men are like rubber bands, how they pull away and how they come back depending on what the relationship support is like, and how also women, when they have issues, they tend to want to talk about it. Men tend to cave with their struggles or whatever they want to deal with, to ponder. And so I found this resource to be really effective, especially for people with different cultural backgrounds, not just here in North America. How I know is because I tested out with different people of different backgrounds, and they all came back and said, wow, this is exactly what happens, when she says this or does that, or wow, this is what happens when I did this, and when I behaved this way, or when I thought this way. And so I find that, and somebody just said, what happens when the spouse doesn't want to read the book? And I actually have an answer to that too, because I found even if one person, if one of the two reads this book and applies some of the strategies, you will find a difference in the relationship. Yes, the Mr. Fix-It is how it's attributed in the books for the males, and the women are the homecoming committee, right? So it's interesting how the author divides things up and labels things like that. And so I find that even if one person reads this, because then there's an understanding, especially when you get to the chapter on how to communicate difficult feelings, and especially when you understand each other's different emotional needs, because it's so different for each partner. Another great resource I find to help with this is the 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. Did I get the name correct? Yes. So this is not just a marriage relationship or a romantic relationship, but also for all relationships, whether it's your children, your parents, friends, not necessarily co-workers, but being able to understand each other's love languages, whether it's physical touch or words of affirmation, acts of service. What are the other 2, sister? Do you remember at the top of your head? Always remember.
Quality time.
Quality time and
gifts.
Okay. So understanding how people like to receive love, give love, I find is very helpful and impactful. So I find these are really great resources. I'm sure you have a few yourself. We have here in Ottawa, the world-renowned Dr. Sue Johnson, who is the relationship expert. I've done some training under her, and even after doing that, I'm like, no, I can't deal with this. I don't like dealing with couple therapy. It's and for those who do, mashallah, because it's one of the most difficult therapies you can do. When you're sitting right there in between 2 people and they're going back and forth, he said, she said, it's his fault, it's her fault. Woo.
So I love working.
We all know our areas of specialty and what we're interested in, what we like. When people come to me for that, I refer them on. So now I've got somebody else to refer to. But essentially being able to work with somebody to work, and a couple, or a family to work through these struggles and get to the place where they can communicate with each other, their difficult emotions, understanding the different emotional needs, not taking things so personally. We get so hurt, right? We get so hurt when the other the other partner rather in the couple doesn't do what we want, or we feel like they don't love us anymore. But it goes so much deeper than that when understanding these. So highly recommend. I remember when I first read this book, I went and got the entire series, the one on intimacy, the one on stress.
Are you talking about John Gray?
John Gray, yes, the Men Are From Mars book. He's got a whole series.
Yeah.
So there's one on physical intimacy and one on as well stress, how males and females in a relationship deal with stress. And there was a great book he had also on daily reminders. So I have them all over my office, found them really very useful. So like the sister's saying, we could do a whole week of seminars on this topic, but here's a few pointers for you as well as some resources that you can use as well. So the next question we have is, how do we establish a way of communication in a house that does not accept the opinion of the other person?
Okay, another favorite topic of mine, which is communication. And I think it starts from a big misconception that we have. When we're talking about communication, in our heads, what we believe is that communication means that I should be able to convince the other person of my viewpoint, right? So, I mean, just the question itself is suggestive of that kind of thinking, that how do we communicate in a house where the other people don't agree, right? And, one of the keys to communication is to recognize that agreement and communication are two different things. So, and again, my personal bias, I guess, is, I'm an academic at heart, so I like to look at the research, right? And my favorite resource for couples is Dr. John Gottman. Why? Because he is completely research-based, and he actually looks at what the stats say, what makes people, be happy in long-term marriages, right? And one of his findings, and a finding which has been replicated with many other people, is that even couples and families who are really happy over the long term, who we call the masters of relationship, they don't agree on everything. In fact, and one of the things that I like to, tell couples, because it's, I think, very empowering, is to understand that almost 70% of things that you argue about are not going to change. Sometimes couples get really upset about that because they think if they're disagreeing or if there's conflict, it means that they have a bad relationship. That actually does not. So what research has shown is that a lot of the problems in marriages are what we call unsolvable problems. So it could be a completely different temperament. Some people are just naturally more tidy than others. Some people, like, one of the things in our relationship ongoing is timing. So my husband, if you tell him to be somewhere at 6, he thinks time means that you get there 5 minutes before and you wait in the car till you enter, right? For me, I grew up in a space where timing was very relaxed. So I think if you show up at 6 for a 6 o'clock invitation, it's actually insulting the host, right? So, and this has been an ongoing source of conflict in our relationship. What has changed, though, is not the conflict so much itself, but how we are handling it, right? So if you handle conflict with a little bit of sense of humor, with some understanding, some compassion, and some knowing that, this is the package, this is what your spouse comes with, and these are some of the things that are upsetting to you, but, it's when we have that kind of attitude towards conflict, that then what happens is over time we get closer together. So, both people will become more closer to each other. However, if the same conflict is made a source of making the other person wrong and, thinking that if we don't solve this, it means there's something really wrong with our relationship and I can't really be happy until this thing is solved. In those kinds of situations, what happens is that couples and families tend to drift further apart. So what this tells us is that conflict is really, if you are disagreeing, it doesn't mean you're not communicating well. So communication means what? What is the goal of communication, right? Very often we think the goal of communication is the other person should accept what I'm saying and we should come to agreement, right? However, if we change the goal of communication to, I'm going to share what I believe and think and feel about the situation, and I'm going to be open to hearing and understanding where the other person is coming from, right? When we have that as a goal, then we are really much more successful in that goal, because that's an achievable thing. And that's what communication is. Communication is actually listening to how the other person is, validating their experience, even if we don't agree. Very often, whether it's with our kids, our spouses, our family members, when people tell us something which we don't agree with, our barriers go up, right? And we automatically become defensive. At that point, if you could just take a breath and try to switch gears, try to switch gears from trying to solve the problem to simply hearing them out and understanding their worldview, understanding where they're coming from, we will find that our relationships will be completely transformed. Because even if we don't agree, the conflict is not going to tear us apart. It's actually going to bring us closer together.
Inshallah. Inshallah. And of course, with families who do have the importance of the value of our Islamic core values and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in front of them as the role models in terms of constantly working towards what they embodied for us, that will also contribute, inshallah, to the calmness and the serenity in the home as well, right? Another question we have here is, please talk about managing house, I laugh at this one, but managing house chores and personal. So we spoke about personal space, but how to manage house chores.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that, Sister Marzia?
Okay, so yes, this is again one of the things that's come up a lot, because suddenly, many of us, including myself, we're finding we can't really leave the kitchen, because everyone's home, they want to be fed 3 times a day,
Yes.
and work is piling up, right? And, for those of us who are trying to homeschool as well as do our own work, it's a lot. So, the first step, it has nothing to do with chores, but it is a way, just give yourself some compassion. Put your hand on your heart and just acknowledge that it's not you, that this situation is hard, and that you're not alone, that a lot of people are having the same kind of experience right now, right? When we actually do that, what happens is that we calm our own nervous system and we're not fighting with ourselves. Very often when a situation is hard, but we tell ourselves, and I go there too, right? From time to time, I'm like, why can't I manage? Like, why can't I manage all, like some people on Instagram seem to be doing so well, they're learning so many things and they're doing so many things and their houses are clean and the kids are happy. And, just reminding ourselves that it's when we are in that space, we're actually fighting with ourselves and taking our valuable energy, which could be used somewhere else. So first step, self-compassion. Secondly, again, have a family meeting about this, not when everyone's upset and arguing about the chores, but at a time when people are relatively calm. Have like literally a formal meeting, say, what, I'm having a hard time managing this house and we all need to pitch in. So let's find ways. So family meeting means, and there's a lot that I've written about family meetings. It's on my website, on my Facebook page, actually, there's many long videos about a lot of these things. So self-compassion for parents, self-care for parents, problem solving, family meetings, a lot of these things, right? So the blueprints are laid out there. But just generally, speak in a way and ask people, what can you help with? Here are all the, let's list the chores, what are some of the things that you can help with? Let's come up with a plan. When we involve people rather than making them wrong or getting upset with them, it's a much more healthy way to interact. And again, one of the things that stops people, and, again, me guilty of that, is our own perfectionism.
Yeah.
So we want help, but we want it done our way. right? So if somebody is loading the dishwasher, and I keep bringing up, like I did a whole series of lectures last year where we kept on talking about the dishwasher for some reason. So I'll bring that up again.
Nobody wants to wash the dishes unless you really enjoy that, right? Some people actually find calmness when they're standing there thinking about other things than washing the dishes. But everybody hates washing the dishes, generally speaking.
Yeah. So, and here's the thing, either, we have a choice. Either we can get support from people who are around us, or we can insist that it be done a certain way and do it ourselves. So when we give ourselves those two options, then, we're clear that if, I really want it my way, then it's a choice I'm making, right? If I want help and support, at some point, I'm going to have to be a little bit flexible about how things are done. And if we can do that, then generally, children, spouses, people will step up if we ask in a respectful way, making a request rather than making them wrong for not doing it.
And ordering people, demanding and telling them what to do. Nobody really likes that. But let's be realistic now. This sounds amazing in theory, right? But realistically, in a household where there is some kind of pecking order in terms of positions, and whether it's the father or the mother or the eldest sibling, it doesn't really work out like that unless you do have a family that's open to communication, being fair and equal in certain aspects, right? So how would you work around that with a family that has a dedicated role to each person because of gender and culture and all that? Because we know from a faith-based perspective, that's not the case. And we know this again for the examples held by the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, that just because you're female, it doesn't mean you have to do all of this in the household, right? But culture dictates that sometimes. Culture imposes that sometimes, right? So how do we work with that sometimes? How do we deal with that? Because I know that's an issue in some families. I hear till now married couples sometimes deal with that issue in terms of, she doesn't do this, he doesn't help with that, I'm expected to do all of that even though I work full time as well. So how do you work with that? How do you try to change, even though it's hard to change the other person if they're not willing to, but how do we work with that type of situation?
So again, we always start with what's in my circle of control. What do I have control over, right? I have control over how I make requests,
Right.
certainly, right? That is where I can start. I have control over setting boundaries for myself. What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? And communicating that, right? So again, making actually a list of what I have control over, and then, do the best of my ability to communicate that in a really respectful way. That's literally what I have control over. After I do that, all of that, is it a guarantee that people are going to say, yes, mom, you are so enlightened and, we're going to do exactly what you say? No. Reality is that some people will follow and some won't. But again, when we are staying within our circle of control, when we are staying and acting on our own value system, that's the best we can expect for ourselves, right? And it makes it more likely that people will be listening to us if we are communicating in that way. Is anything a guarantee? Of course not. And if I had the 2-sentence way of convincing people to do their bit, I would be really famous. To put it mildly.
There's no magic solution.
There is no magic. And again, what it does do though is that even if people are not they're not pulling their weight, for example, and they're not doing it, the more we stay within our circle of control, the more we act on our own value system, it makes it much more likely that even when we disagree, it's not going to damage our relationships.
Yes.
And it leaves the door open for people to change, right?
Yeah, there's a really great chapter in that book, again, Men Are From Mars, where it talks about how to get support from your partner without impacting the relationship. And just like you were saying, Sister Marzia, is when you do work on what you do have control over, do the best that you can with what you've got. And instead of nagging and shouting and yelling and constantly demanding, from your partner or children, just taking back that control and doing what you can. So for example, if you were expected to do things that you didn't really have to do or want to do, and you do within your locus of control, almost like you're on strike, you'll notice after a time that people start picking up after themselves. And it's also creating that routine in the home, I think, early on in the marriage, the relationship, but talking about these things ahead of time before you get married, understanding the expectation of the other person and what you are willing to give as well, right? And also when you move in, living in together is different than during the engagement period and talking to each other and things like that.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
creating routines and setting up routines with your children early on. For example, you get out of bed, you tidy that bed. This is actually a discipline that's taught in martial arts for children as part of their homework, even though they do their martial arts in the dojo. When at home, they expect them, and they show that. I've seen that, like that they tell them step by step, this is what you're expected to do at home. It is all about that discipline and routine. And so if we teach that to our kids early on as well, sometimes parents just want to do everything for their children, but then this becomes a problem. I can testify to that, having worked with the population at the university level, where students for the first time are living on their own, and they say things such as, oh, I didn't realize how much work there's involved because my parents did everything for me. Or realizing that pizza or rice is not an actual full meal, or a healthy meal rather, and understanding that the clothes that are piled up, they don't wash themselves, right? So it's really interesting to see young adults understanding and coming to the realization of how much their family actually does for them when they are living on their own and moved away. And then they take on that responsibility, having to cook healthy meals, clean their clothes, pay the bills, and on top of that, still do their schoolwork and stay healthy and do well and be a normal functioning person. SubhanAllah, how that realization comes later on. But then this comes, I think, with family dynamics and parenting and routine. And yes, it doesn't mean if a parent is getting you to tidy your bed, those who are listening out there, it doesn't mean that they're trying to punish you, or they're teaching you routine. And these are important things that you don't see in the moment, but later on carry so much weight.
That's exactly right. Sometimes when we are over functioning with our children, we're actually handicapping them.
Yes.
And when we look at it that way, it makes it, because obviously, when the child is young, the most efficient way to do it is to do it ourselves. Because when they do it, they're going to make mistakes, they're going to take longer, it won't be done perfectly, right?
And that's okay.
Exactly. So when we are willing for them to learn by making mistakes, by doing it their way, by not doing it perfectly, and still expecting that they do, some of the looking after themselves and as much as they can, that's actually how they are going to get the skills of managing themselves. Also, when parents recognize that the more the child can do for themselves, it's actually the best way to build self-esteem
Yes.
and confidence in the child. It's
Absolutely.
the best way. These days, one of the big mistakes that a whole generation of parents made was thinking that the more they do for their children, the more they praise them, what I call junk praise, just lavishing, evaluative language on them, it will help them, right? And what's happened is that we have a whole generation growing up who feel ill prepared for life, who has anxiety, who has they don't have self-esteem or self-confidence because they've never done anything for themselves. So the more able you are to do things for yourself, you're actually giving your child a gift, a gift of having the sense of agency, of being able to manage their own environment, to have a sense of confidence that they can actually manage life. So it's extremely important.
And now's an opportunity, if we look at it when we're stuck at home, is to really build those skills. I know we've spoken about, oh, it's not about productivity. We're dealing through a worldwide crisis and trauma. Absolutely agree with that. But it doesn't mean we completely let go at home as well. This is the opportunity, if we're always rushing out the door in the morning, to teach your kids when you wake up, start with making the beds, put away your pajamas and ABC, and tidy up your room, put things back where they belong. Just teaching them the routine. And this is the time that we can do right now, as we're not rushed to leave and do something urgent to get to work and and walk out the door with the 5 meters of snow, at least here in Ottawa, right? Not so much like that in the Toronto area.
No, that's exactly right. I think if we use this time to actually build life skills in our children, it will be a really valuable lesson for them. And things that, again, what I'm recommending these days to parents is, you know, like take a breath about the academics. Everyone's in the same situation. It's a
Exactly.
lot to expect of yourself, to homeschool, to do your own work, to manage the home, to do all of this. It's a lot to expect. So just take a breath, and if you were to let anything go, just be a little bit more flexible about that. And the more children get involved in running the house, seeing how finances work, seeing how the just basic life skills, cooking, cleaning, uh, those, if they can, that would be a really valuable use of this time, like really amazing if we
And
can.
having a family meeting and looking at what skills, what preferences, like we said, some people enjoy washing the dishes. So perhaps having somebody in the family set the table up while other people are cleaning and cleaning up afterwards, et cetera, et cetera. Some people enjoy vacuuming the floors or whatever it is, cleaning the bathrooms. It can be done if possible. And it shouldn't be just put on one person, AKA the mom, right? You've seen so many moms burn out working at home and outside of the home. Definitely this is an opportunity to divide up the work within the house. And like the sister was saying, this is an opportunity for our children to build up these important skills, and having time to play, having time to learn, having time to do some of these house chores is so valuable for all of us, definitely. Now, we have a question here from Facebook. It's a bit of a heavier question, and it's very relevant to what's been happening. So I'm going to read it out loud and we can take a look at how to answer this. My husband's twin sister passed away. I'm so sorry to hear this. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. During this crisis, he couldn't see her live her last days until the end. What can I say to him to tell him it's not his fault, as he was her primary caregiver?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of people have had to face the reality of these days. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on this, sister?
So again, dealing with grief is a whole thing in itself, right?
Yes.
And again, a lot of us will be dealing with different kinds of grief, whether it's loss of employment, loss of loved ones, loss of just being in the same space. Families are scattered all over the world and they're stuck there. So with grief is more, it's not really what you say as much as the willingness to witness somebody's pain. So to recognize that, whatever he's feeling, it will come in waves. Grief comes in waves. And again, we shouldn't be in a rush. Like, what is not effective is be in a rush to make the other person feel better. So what you can say is just, I'm willing to listen. Whatever you're going through, I'm here. I'm here for you. And by here for you, it doesn't mean, let's look on the bright side. Let's see, at least, we have, and in our culture, we have a lot of this at least, right? At least she did this, and at least this, and like all of those are true. It's not that they're not true. Showing gratitude for all of the blessings that we still have, and as our faith teaches us that the best is still to come. The alhamdulillah, if we live life in a way, it's literally the best is yet to come, right? However, those are really good things to remind ourselves. They're not generally that helpful for someone who's going through grief at that time.
Right.
So it's for that person to take their journey however it looks like. And when we are in a rush to quote unquote help the other person feel better, that's when we get into trouble. Right. So in fact, again, there's a long video on the Facebook page about talking to children about grief and loss, which we did before this whole thing, but I think it's even more relevant now than ever. So, watch that. And that we talked a lot about how to deal with our own grief before we can even be there for children or anyone else. Right.
Mhm.
So just lots of duas for you and for your husband as you navigate this journey of grief. And inshallah, it will. I don't even know. I wouldn't want even to say that it gets easier, but you learn to manage it without it taking over your whole life, right? And that takes time, and everyone's timeline is different, right? So while they're going through it, just to recognize that grief comes in waves. It's not going to be the same every minute. Some days are going to be really hard, and some days are going to be better. And eventually, inshallah, the person going through grief, even in their pain, can look at the sunrise and feel grateful. Can look at faces of their children and feel some joy. But now is not the time to turn off emotion. It's the more, we say the quickest way through emotion is actually through it, right? So if we just let it be, it'll come in waves and it'll subside, and you will be able to feel joy along with your pain, right? Do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's a beautifully thorough answer when it comes to grief, and recognizing that each person has their own journey. Like you said, even the stages of grief in itself is not linear. The initial shock and denial of it could come later, not necessarily right at the beginning. The anger phase of how did this happen? I couldn't be there, frustrated, that kind of thing. Learning to negotiate with the environment, coming to the acceptance of it. Not everybody will go through that in that linear way. Everybody's going to experiencing it differently. But what you said is so valid and important, to recognize what you're going through, what he's going through, being there in support for each other, and just being there. I really loved what you said in terms of the best way to get through it is to go through it. And that's really important, and utilizing the supports around, and of course a person of faith using the examples that we have again through the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam in terms of how they dealt with grief, but using that as a model for us, but understanding psychologically what is grief, recognizing where you are at right now, and being compassionate as well. This is also new for us. Just being at week 4 right now, I think we've just begun to truly understand that, hey, we are in this right now. We are actually here right now. And so we are going to be dealing with grief, with losses, unexpected, and it could be related to the pandemic or it could not be. And because now we're taking a look at a whole new look of burial, a whole new look of what the majalis, what the aza, what the funeral looks like, not being able to be there with our loved ones at the time of death or mourn them as we would in our communities, in our culture, as well as our religious rituals when it comes to grieving. We're not having that now. Now we even have online funerals that we're seeing. I know there's a group in Australia that does that, where they would go to the family of the person who passed on, and what they do is they would then do the majlis there and the family in the other room, just to take precaution, and then do a live there from their home, just so that they could still honor and do the rituals, but with nobody around, and share that with the community that way. So subhanAllah, how we've had to turn to that kind of sharing of our grief now, because this is so important within our cultures and our communities, how we deal with grief, how we show support and love, and how we're there for each other. It helps us get through to the grieving process, but now we don't even have that it does become an opportunity of other people finding different ways of how to grieve with it, so we're not completely isolated or alone. I just want to give a heads up that we might have just a few minutes left before the Instagram cuts off, and if that's the case, we're going to continue. But I think so far so good. So on Insta Ahlul Bayt, if we get cut off, it will come back in, but I think we can continue with our live here. Another question that we have here is, what would keep us motivated while compromising within our marriage? So that's an interesting question when it comes to compromise. Mm-hmm. And that's very delicate and sensitive, because sometimes with compromising, the other person may not fully agree, but they're doing it for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of their love for the other person. And so that can be very self-sacrificing. But then how much of that can a person hold up before they blow up in the other person's face? So compromise has to truly come from a place of love and understanding and respect to the other person's, again, different emotional needs, but at the same time also respecting your needs. If you're constantly giving away to like a people pleaser type of person, or constantly trying to please your partner for the sake of their love, there comes a point where that's not going to be okay for you anymore. So being very careful as to what compromise could mean. And you know what, there are times where, yeah, you're going to have to give up on something you really wanted because it makes sense to do the other way, even though what you mentioned earlier in an argument is it has to be your way kind of thing. Well, no, sometimes you got to let off from that and put emotions aside and really go with what truly makes sense for the situation. And it can be very sensitive in a relationship, in a marriage, like we're saying, because there's so much emotion involved. You take things so personally. Over time, that motivation can go down, right? If you're not constantly giving back to each other in a fair way. I'm not saying equally, because there's no such thing as equally when it comes to that. It's not a tit for tat either. In a relationship, you're not constantly doing things and waiting for something to come back to you. I don't think it's very healthy keeping a meter on each other like that. But to be able to honestly, truly give from your heart to the other person. But obviously it has to be in a healthy relationship. When you're in a toxic, when you're in a abusive or a narcissistic type of relationship, this doesn't work. Compromise becomes abuse and manipulation to get what pleasing the other person, but what the other person who is in the position of power to get what they want. So we're not talking here about toxic relationships. Inshallah, this is a topic we are going to explore another time. But for right now, when you are in a relatively healthy relationship, it's hard to stay motivated when you're constantly giving, and there isn't something that's filling up your bucket, so to speak. What are your thoughts, sister?
Okay. Yes, again, a huge, big topic. I don't like the word compromise, actually. Yeah. I don't know about you, but when I'm in disagreement, I like to win.
Oh.
But here's the thing, that, there's you winning, there's me winning, and there's then the win for the relationship.
Ahsanti, exactly.
And when I look at it that way, then I'm much more able to quote unquote compromise, right? So again, to recognize that, our relationships with each other are an entity by themselves. And when we are working to win at all costs, then our relationship might be losing. Right. So when I look at it that way, it gives me more motivation, number one. Number two, as you very properly said, that, when you're always the one giving in, so there are two types of people, right? One is, a lot of people are what we call conflict avoidant. In other words, they'll do anything to keep the peace. Fine, have it your way. It's not a big deal, right? And if you truly feel that it's not a big deal, then great. However, if internally you are feeling that it is a big deal, but you're not saying it, then that's a problem, right? That's when resentment keeps building. And like you said, that there will be a point where it will all come crashing down. And usually when it comes crashing down, it's over something, like we say, the straw that broke the camel's back. It's a really small, meaningless thing, which causes a big explosion, right? So how do we avoid that? Number one is when something does matter, and in any relationship in our lives, some things should matter. Not everything. Sorry?
Can you hold your thought 1 second? Because we did finish the Instagram, so we're just getting back on there, because I think it's so important to answer that question. So this is going to take a look at how to work with compromise, especially when it's a buildup of resentment. So I think we're back on now. Yeah.
Okay. So as I was saying that, when I think of compromising as winning for my relationship, I'm much more motivated and likely to do that, right? In any relationship, if we are human beings, right, some things do matter to us. There are things like not everything should matter, but there are some things which are more important to us than others, right? And relationships are basically a balance between negotiating, letting go, this thing is not that important to, no, what, this is really important to me. And part of that is recognizing for myself, which are, really like deal breakers or things that are really important. And again, a practice of letting go of things that are not that important. So again, two very important things. One, to recognize that some things are important, and also to recognize, what, this is something that's not that important. And that again is before even negotiating or talking about it to somebody else, I need to be clear on that, right? And it's a process of self-reflection, of self-awareness, of coming to some understanding that, what, these things matter more to me than other things. And, when I am in that space, when I know that, what, yes, I can actually let a lot of things go, but this is where I really need to draw a line. That's when we become more empowered to speak in a way. And when I'm saying speak in a way, I mean letting the other person know that this is really important to me and why. Right. And again, that's a practice or a skill that's easier said than done. Sometimes we don't know why things matter. And when we are clear about that, we can communicate it in a way that doesn't make the other person wrong. So it's not your fault that when I walk into a room and I see socks on the floor, it really upsets me. It's not your fault. However, I grew up with a love of order, and when I see socks on the floor, it just makes me feel disrespected. It makes me feel no one cares about me. You see how that's a big difference, right? So one is a complaint, and I think it's a wonderful idea to get really good at complaining, right? Complaining means, letting the other people know if something is upsetting you and why it's upsetting you, right? That's very different from a criticism. A criticism is, you are the problem. You are a slob. You leave socks on the floor. You are lazy. You are this, right? When I'm talking in that way, compromise is almost impossible. Why? Because when I'm attacking somebody else, it's like a physical attack, right? When I'm attacking my spouse, they are going to defend. They're not going to be listening. But when I'm speaking up for myself, they're much more likely to listen, right? So compromise is not just like, fine, we'll do it your way, or, we have to do it. It's actually a process of understanding how and why things are important. Going like school, academics is really important to me. Why? Because, when I was growing up, the only way we survived, my parents gave up everything to give us a good education. And the only way I am where I am is because of their sacrifices. And I feel that it's my duty to pass that on to my children. You see how different a conversation that is than, no, they're going to this school because, right? When we communicate in that way, it's
the authoritative
exactly
style. Yeah, doesn't really go well with the rest of the family when you're in that type of family, but it's also something that we notice traditionally as well, more old school, so to speak. And it doesn't really go well. I think you and I both seen the outcomes with clients in these types of situations, whether it's the partner or the children, very unhealthy attachment styles, fear, lack of self-esteem, trust. So it becomes really challenging to work within family dynamics when you do have the authoritative type. You want more of the, I forget the term.
One is authoritarian,
yes,
and the other one is authoritative.
Yes. And so we want to be the other in terms of having that balance and healthy communication. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that very thorough answer to a question. I think it's very relevant, especially these days, who's doing what at home when you're stuck, who's going to take care of what chores, or how to compromise with each other on things that you truly don't want to. So it's really key to be able to manage your emotions and compromise and have open discussions and open-hearted discussions with your partner as well as the rest of the family. So another question that we have here, and this really made us open up our eyes when we looked at it earlier, it says, advice to girls who are married at 19 about managing life. So
do you want to start with that one?
I think at 19 is a very delicate age where we're for both the males and females who are still trying to learn about themselves, their likes and dislikes, their skills, their abilities, what they want to do in life, whether it's school. I know some young people who have wanted to get married young and wanted to have children young, and still, mashallah, are studying and raising a family. And props to them, mashallah, who are making it work. Again, I think age is just a number. It really comes down to maturity as well. What kind of family have you been raised in? What kind of motivations and encouragements, do you have? And if people want to marry that young, it truly is up to them. But then we also know on the other side, there are families who are forcing their daughters to marry at that age. So there's so many different, it's such a generally a specific question at the same time, right? So there's a lot of development still going on, although we do know that women mature, ladies, females mature faster than men and are very much capable of, let's say, starting a family physically and reproducing at that age, right? But it also comes down to maturity, life goals, what do you want? And with the partner that you're with, if they're also mature, engaging, compromising, and a lot of the things that we've already discussed. So I think it's more of a discussion to answer this question, right? In terms of managing life, to understand what you want. And that can change. I think it's a lot. And we say this to kids, but young men and women who are coming into college and university, I think it's a lot to expect somebody from high school to know what it is that they want in terms of what career path. And I think you're a living testament to that. You started off in corporate law and then did all sorts of things before you came to being a family therapist. So our journey is not linear. It can change along the way, but understanding early on, perhaps in terms of a direction of what you want to achieve, and managing life is just about life management skills, whether it's schoolwork, whether it's academic, whether it's professional life, but home life. So not necessarily at that age. I think this can be applied to any age. Again, this answer can be answered this question can be answered in a discussion, not necessarily, okay, here's your answer. What are your thoughts with this, sister?
Yes, again, when I'm looking at the question, it's I'm not sure exactly what is being asked here, actually. If it is about marriage, then I would just start with, again, providing some resources perhaps on, because what I'm finding is that with young couples today, there sometimes are very unrealistic expectations of what a good marriage looks like actually what matters and what makes a happy marriage, right? So just to get some good advice or some good information more than anything else on what is important in relationships, and one of the books that I keep coming back to, which is again my own although I've read John Gray and I've even worked with him, like I've trained with him and with Dr. Gary Chapman and Sue Johnson actually, but what I find that, again, 7 principles of making marriage work. It's a completely research-based book. It'll give you a really good idea on what to focus on. And what he's finding again is all of the again what he lays it out very clearly. Don't worry about these things. If you're arguing about stuff, don't really worry about what you're arguing about. Just focus on how you are discussing, how you're arguing, and learn to make repairs. So if you slip, one of the and going back to even the toddler question, right, that when we lose it with our children, with our spouses, one of the keys to making relationships work is to take responsibility and to apologize. Like really get really good at apologizing, right? And what does a good apology look like? It looks like, first of all, it's not about saying, yes, I'm sorry, but, one of the keys of a good apology is do not use the word but. If you say but, it basically negates your whole apology, and what it comes off is self-defense, right?
Can you say
I would say not even in the same conversation. So say you you overreacted, whether it's with your children or with your spouse, right? At that point, you just need to make an apology. I'm sorry, I should not have raised my voice. I'm sorry for yelling at you, right? Now, in your mind, you may have 1 million reasons why you felt justified to yell, right? But that's not the time, because if you say but you made me do it, which is the worst kind of apology, right? It actually will destroy your relationship. What is going to be really good modeling for your children and really good relationships for your spouse is simply to get good at apologizing, and the conversation about how they behaved is a separate conversation. It's not in the realm of an apology, right? So just to remember that. But coming back to managing a marriage, right? So recognizing that you will make mistakes, and you keep coming back, keep making repairs, keep being there for each other, all of that. And also, what I find with young people again is, I'm finding really a lot that this generation, they want everything to be certain before they make the first move, right? So whether they are planning to settle down, or they, this whole idea that we need to discuss everything before marriage, I tend to disagree with that, because I don't know about, but I know when I started my relationship, you change, you change, you grow, the other person changes, and what you think is important when you first get married is not what ends up being important, right? So if you have this great need, and I think, one of the lessons that the pandemic can teach us is this whole illusion of control that has been shattered so badly, right? Never again can we assume that we know, that we are in control of our own lives, right? If that's a lesson that we learn from this, it's a big lesson, right? So, sometimes like couples are wanting to get together, but they don't know where the other person's going to be working. They don't know where they're going to be living. What if the person moves? What if they change? What if this happens? And you can spend your whole life doing what ifs, you have actually really, nobody has 20/20 vision, right? So, I'm not saying just go into it blind, look at your values. If your values are aligned, that's a really good place to start. If you like each other, that's a really good place to start, right? And everything else you tend to figure out as it goes. So, that's basically for all of us, right? How do we manage life? Is to recognize that things are not certain, and let's do the next right thing that's right in front of us, and that's how we can move forward.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, sister. Again, a very thorough answer. That it's hard when you get questions that are probably very specific to the person's situation, the mind. We have to interpret it in a different way perhaps, and try to answer it in a general way that covers everything. One of our last questions has to do with more of a general question in terms of therapy. So how to overcome unexplained anxiety, overthinking, or fear of everything. And again, this I think is very relevant to what's happening these days, because there is a lot of unexplained things that are happening. There is a fear of the unknown, and that is normal to feel that fear and anxiety of things that you don't understand, or you don't know what's going to happen. And again, like you said, sister, understanding and accepting that there is an uncertainty. And so some of the strategies I use in therapy with people is it's by one of my favorites, Dr. David Burns, and I took a training with him, and he's the anxiety guru. And he does this strategy where he actually gets people to look at their fears in the face, in a safe environment, of course, in the safe therapeutic environment, and take a look at their fears and go through them. The what ifs, he actually goes through them with the client to find the root base of what has triggered your fear. And a lot of it comes down to what we were saying is uncertainty, right? So from a spiritual perspective, we have the advantage as Muslims of looking through the spiritual sources of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Putting that fear, lifting it to him in the form, whether it's dua, but lifting it to him, right? Relying upon him, using our spiritual methods to accepting that we are not in control. He is ultimately in control. That kind of helps. I actually used this just the other day with my daughter, who said, I'm afraid of. And I said, well, what's bigger than this fear? She's very young, but subhanAllah, it worked. because she's saying, oh, I was having a, nightmare, or I was afraid of, we're alone in the house. And I said, well, that may be the case, but what's bigger than that fear? What's bigger than that thing in your imagination? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ask him for help. And she just told me this morning that, you know what, I didn't think of anything. I had beautiful dreams last night. Now, this is the musings of a 9-year-old. And but it was so beautiful to see when she actually put her mind and prayed and put her fears to Allah and said, yeah, you know what, he's bigger than my fear. That helped her put things into perspective in her frame of mind, and answered me the next day saying, I had beautiful dreams. I didn't fear anything. So if we can just take this example and apply it along with therapeutic strategies of facing our fear and looking at what is the root. Is this something that I can handle? So David Burns, excuse me, uses that. So is this so bad? What if then what? Then what? And it comes down to the root. And then you look at the root. Is that something that's so bad? No, that's not so bad. I can handle that. I can deal with that. And I find this is a good strategy of breaking things down. And I use it a lot with my clients. Again, when we're looking at unexplained anxiety, we have to understand anxiety. It could either be something that is genetic, so there's a biological inherited function, just like we get with diabetes or cardiovascular diseases. It could be something that's already within the family. And so when you use different, excuse me, I still have that annoying cough, but if you use different strategies in therapy, like taking care of your stress levels, making sure you're eating well, sleeping well, exercising, if all of these things are not working, and using these cognitive behavioral type of strategies, if all of these things are not working to lower your anxiety, then it could be very well potentially a hereditary or a biological factor where medication can help lower the intensity of these symptoms so that these natural methods and CBT and other strategies can lower that anxiety and fear. So this is just some thoughts I have around that. How about you, sister?
Yeah, those are all really excellent suggestions, and I love how your daughter reacted to. It's really lovely when, because children are so pure, and they don't have all of this overthinking usually that we do as adults. So they accept things, and they use the strategy so easily and well, and it's always lovely to see that. One of the things that I would just add to that is, really look at what feeds your anxiety. So, in these days, everyone is on high alert. And one of the things that I noticed about myself is what feeds my anxiety is how much news I'm taking in. So for myself, I actually, and everyone has a different threshold, right? So really, notice what feeds your anxiety and do less of that. It's literally as simple as that. So if you are consuming media all the time, or looking at the news several times a day, or even getting messages on your phone, you really need to take charge. Take charge and draw boundaries at how much you are going to engage with the outside world, right? And I find that if I go on Twitter the last thing at night, I will not sleep that night, because it creates a lot of anxiety, because there's so much bad news. And one of the studies I recently read was that the amount of information that is coming to us on any given day is more than even a century ago, or even a few decades ago, people consumed in their entire lifetime. So it's not surprising that we are on high alert all the time. The way our brain is designed, and I always say, the fact that we have anxiety is not a design flaw. It's Allah has designed us perfectly to deal with acute stress in our lives.
Absolutely.
So if we see a snake, or if we see a stick that may potentially be a snake, our brain is designed to react to that, assuming that the stick is a snake. Why?
Danger.
Because if it is a stick, no big deal, right? But if it is a snake, then our entire body physiology needs to shut off the thinking brain. We need to respond to the danger, right? So we either run away or we fight it. Those are the two main options, or we can play dead or whatever, right?
The flight fight response.
Exactly. However, the way modern life is that we have these paper sticks or these paper tigers all over the place that are coming to us 24/7. So it's not surprising that we have seen such a spike in anxiety over the last few decades, right? And one of the things is to recognize that that it's just our brain. It's our brain responding to, the alarm systems in our brain which are responding to perceived threats.
Right.
And the way we can, there are many things we can do to calm down our autonomic nervous system, right? And there's many, like meditation, prayer, shutting off devices, like spending some time in silence, spending some time in nature, spending some time with ourselves. All of these are things which will help calm down our danger signal perception, right? So there, and I've written about this a lot on my blog. So for those of you who are interested, can go and read about many different things. In fact, right now, the whole series that I'm doing in the Daily Wisdom is about simple practices to build resilience, because that's what we need right now, right? Yes. So it's just like literally a short burst, a very small practice that we can do every day to manage what is coming at us right now.
So what was the name of your blog again, sister, so people can follow that?
So it's marziahassan.org and /daily wisdom. So you can sign up and you will get a short, email burst every morning to, inshallah, help you they're very short and very simple, because I don't believe in adding more to people's plates than we already have, right?
It's so true. This has been advice that a lot of the therapists have been giving these days during the pandemic, is to select a reliable resource that you can trust and look at that maybe once or twice a day at a specific time, so that you don't overwhelm yourself with all of that. Definitely doing that before going to bed can ruin your sleep, not only with the light off your device, but the information overload there that can cause that fear. Definitely. So it's really important to be updated in terms of what's happening with the pandemic, but not to get into the whole PhD of WhatsApp, what's out there right now. And I've heard some speakers say that, and I love that term. And we've all gotten these amazing degrees through social media right now, and sharing all sorts of very strange ways of dealing with the virus itself. But to be able to recognize legitimate resources and checking them at specific times during the day that don't impact your overall well-being, especially before going to bed. Now, speaking of fear and whatnot, we have a question here from Instahl Bayt that says, how do you overcome an extreme fear of failure? I see that a lot with my clients at the university. Definitely those who are afraid of failing their exams, where their future is supposedly dependent upon this actual mark, which I disagree with, because I always look back now at the grades that I didn't do too well, that I was terrified going into the exams for. And 10, 15 years later, I look back and see that really was not that significant. So one tip here that I'd like to share is how to overcome an extreme fear of failure is to accept that, you are going to fail. Plain and simple. You are not going to succeed right away at something. Acceptance of failures, recognizing things that we want to work on, I don't like to say weaknesses, but things that we can improve upon. Just accepting that goes a long way in dealing with this issue, because we're going to fail, we're going to fall, we're going to trip, we're going to break a bone, any of these things, right? I'm just using metaphors here. They're going to happen. How to succeed in that is to just keep trying over and over again, finding different methods, different ways, and learning from that. Failures are not failures. They're learning opportunities. They truly are. But you have to accept, before even going into anything, that there is a chance that you may not succeed in this, and that is okay. And building and working from that, learning from that, asking for help and support to grow from that. What are your thoughts, sister, with that one?
Yes, I think everything you said, and as you're working with this population, I'm sure it's what you deal with all the time, right? And I actually recommend that everyone fails often. Get really good at failing, because if we're not failing, it means we're really not living. If we are engaged in life, if we're living what I call full out, full on, if we're living our best life, if we're living big, we will fail. And that's a really good thing. So if we're okay with it and we give the message to our children that it's okay to take risks, like in academics, if they are never failing, it means they're never trying things that are outside their comfort zone. And one of my most favorite quotes, which I think, we should really remind ourselves every day, is that when we're safe, we're really not living life, right? If, like it said, that a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are built for.
Exactly.
Right? So if we're living our life, if we're taking risk, if we learn new things, we will fail. The first time we started to drive, we weren't perfect, right? And the more we did it, the better we got at it. But if we had waited, if we had waited to become a perfect driver before we sat behind the wheel, we wouldn't learn how to drive. And so the way we learn and we gain confidence is actually by doing something, and if in our minds we're waiting to do something before we have it all figured out, we will all be those ships which are very safe in harbor, but we're really not living our full potential.
You just reminded me, sister, I actually failed my first driving test. The first driving test, and it was with somebody who was very challenging and difficult too, and I thought I was getting everything right, and then I turned when it was yellow. Ooh, he failed me straight from that. But I learned from that, absolutely. And the second time I took it, alhamdulillah, flying colors. One last comment here before we wrap up. Somebody mentioned, I went to the supermarket today and I felt a lot of anxiety trying to follow the 2-meter distance rule. I kept forgetting and then saw people making faces at me for not following. I did not enjoy my shopping. Needless to say, I think any shopping these days is not enjoyable. It is full of fear and people have a lot of anxiety. My daughter jokes with me, Mom, if you go out with that cough of yours, you're going to scare people. So I've just resorted to going niqabi these days. I think it's safer now to be niqabi and covering your face, which is ironic because before, if we were covered, or if the sisters who wore the niqab, we were considered the face of fear. People actually feared us when we went out in public. Now, if you're not covered, people are afraid. Subhanallah, how that has turned, huh?
Yes,
But,
for sure.
Especially with what's happening, but don't expect to enjoy your shopping. I mean, that's it. Accept that right there. You're not going to enjoy it. It's a chore that you have to go and do to feed the family, of course, and yourself. But to take all the precautions, sure, go niqabi if you want. That's fine if you feel safe. I feel safe doing that these days now, no problem. But to take the precautions, washing your hands when you come in. Some people have even gone to disinfecting their items when they come into the home. If that's what makes you feel safe, then do that. And, just ignore people making those faces at you. If you're observing that, you're doing the best that you can. And that's all you can follow, really. And I guess avoid the places where there are lots of crowded people or who are not following. I'm openly saying it, going into Adonis or some other Middle Eastern store, there's no following the rules. And
Yes,
those
no distancing happening. Yes.
I don't feel very comfortable going into those places because I see that's not, the physical distance is not being practiced very well. I hope people have changed that now, but I've seen that in other places outside where there are lineups. Inside of the store, there's precautions, there's the distances. So going to the places where you feel safe is really important, I think, as well during these days. What are your thoughts, sister?
Exactly. I think the only thing we should focus on when we are going shopping is maintaining physical distance. That's where our attention needs to be, and to recognize that everyone is going through stress, and their stress shows up in making glaring faces at other people, and it's not about us, right?
Exactly.
So as long as we are practicing safe, for sure. I mean, when you said that shopping is not a pleasant experience, every time I go shopping, I literally feel like I'm going into a war zone.
Oh, wow.
By the time you finish gearing up and, mentally preparing, like I have everything ready so I don't have to put my hand in my pocket and, just planning, it's very stressful. So minimize it as much as you can. I know, at least I tried to get delivery online. There's nothing available, to the best of your ability. If you can do online shopping now, do that, minimize it. And when you're going out, literally focus just on, what you need to do, maintaining safe distance, and then just send out blessings to everyone. right? It's really not about us. People are in panic mode, and when you're in panic mode, you're only focused on you're coming from a place of fear, and that's not connecting. It's very isolating and distancing. So it's really not about you.
It is. Some folks are mentioning in Arabic what's going on, what's happening. So I'm just going to say something very quickly in Arabic. السلام عليكم المتابعين باللغة العربية. احنا معالجين نفسيين وقاعد نحكي عن الموضوع عن المعالجة النفسية، بس المواضيع عن الأسرة وشون واحد يدير باله بهالوقت هذا أثناء الكورونا فيروس البانديميك، لأنه مضغوطين بالبيوت وشون واحد يتعامل ويا العائلة. فهاي قاعد نحكي عن هالمواضيع هذني. So I hope my Iraqi there wasn't too bad and people understood what we were saying. And I think we've gone through all of the questions. Alhamdulillah wa shukr. So if anybody has any final questions, you can just quickly pop them in now before we wrap up. Is there anything else, sister, that you'd like to mention, or just to give some ideas out to families out there managing this difficult time, this stressful time? Any last words?
Be kind to yourself and give your family grace. Just be kind to each other and focus on love, really. That's what's going to get us through this.
Absolutely. It's all about love. My daughter gave me this ring, which she has different fake jewelry rings, and she gave this to me and she said, Mama, can you please wear this so that we're always together? And I thought that was so sweet, even though we're in the same house, so please wear this, Mama. So I've in honor of my daughter today, and love and compassion and what you were saying. We do have one question here, but I think it might be a big question, but we'll try to answer it quickly before we wrap up. Can you please give advice on in-law relationship? Brother, can you be a little bit specific with that question? Because that is a whole series right there. Can you please give advice on in-laws? So I'm just waiting if the brother can give us something specific. What are you looking for with that? It's such a big question.
It's a big question. I actually wrote a whole course on this, in-law relationships. And I think, and we've tried to do it many times in live, in-person sessions as well. But one of the things we recognize is that people are not willing to come, even though they really need it, because they don't want to be identified as someone who has in-law issues, right? But just to know that there are many things we can do, even when, and in fact, I think I do have one webinar that I had done on in-law relationships, and I'm happy to post the link to it. It was through the Academy for Learning Islam. They have lots of great resources. And if people want to Google it, I think it might still be on there. I hope it is. I've done lots of parenting series with them as well. So that's also there. But we had done one webinar on, I think it was called 5 Skills to Manage in-law Relationships. Oh, it was called Welcome to the Family.
Okay.
It's called Welcome to the Family.
The brother specified it. He said living with them and dealing with personal space.
Wow. Okay. So again, I think it's the same, right? Whether you are dealing with in-laws, your own family, it is about speaking about it at a time when people are not stressed. So not in the middle of a conflict, but separating the issue from the event, right? So if the event is that somebody told you something and you're upset, that's not a great time to discuss it. But if the issue is managing space, then set aside time to talk about it, and again, come from your own space. Share that I have a need for space, rather than, no, you are not giving me space, right? Again, that's a very different way too. And then once you share why it's important, you make a clear request. So the request might be, while I'm working, while I'm on Zoom, I would request that no one come in the room, and I can help by announcing that I'm now going on a live call. I can put a sign on the door to please not disturb me. Again, when we make clear requests and we come from a place of speaking for ourselves, then make other people wrong, those are our best hopes for helping other people understand our needs.
Mm-hmm. Wow, the questions about in-laws are just flowing in right now.
Another wow, okay.
Yeah, And we're saying we're wrapping up soon. So we will wrap up in a few minutes, but I'd like to answer these questions. How to balance relationship between in-laws and spouses?
I think we need to do another session on this.
Possibly, especially on in-laws.
Yeah.
Another question is what do you do if you are saying to a family member that they are doing haram stuff, but it will not help them just saying it? So what should I say or do? It's a good one. I'll repeat it. What do you do if you are saying to a family member that they are doing haram stuff, but it will not help them just saying it? So what should I do or say?
Do you have any ideas?
Well, this one, it's challenging because are we talking about a partner or a child? And if it's a child, how old are they at the age of baligh, where it's going to be halal or haram? There's so many different dynamics around that. I guess giving the advice and giving them resources as to why this is haram, and they have the choice if they want to follow it or not. That's really up to them, giving them the resources, right? So we got to be careful in terms of not to impose as well, and how we say and communicate this is important, because if you're coming from a place, again, where you're being very authoritative, demanding, that's not going to really bring out to respectful response. But if you do it in a way, communicating it in a respectful way and just saying, here's the resources for that, I care about you, you're coming from a place of love, it all depends on the intent, right, as well. And so if you deliver it that way, then it really becomes up to them. This is if it's a baligh or somebody, a partner. But if it's a child, I think you have a little bit more leeway here in terms of dealing with something. Like if they're doing something they're not supposed to, or watching something, let's say on YouTube, you have more control to kind of, stop that. Whereas if it's a young adult or a partner, it becomes more challenging to deal with that. Yeah, so it's all about the communication and your intent in terms of how, is it a matter of you controlling them? You don't want them to do a certain thing because you feel like having that control? Or is it truly out of concern that they're committing something that can, if it's sinful, that it could be harmful to them in the long run, right? What are your thoughts, sister? Wrap up our last question. Yeah.
So again, I think, it's coming back to our circle of control, and, assuming that they know what they're doing, it is their choice, and we need to respect that, that we can't really change anyone. If people have information and resources, they will make the choices that they will make. And when it comes to ourselves, how do we live our values? We can't really enforce our values. We can't teach our values. We can live from our values. And that is the best way to inspire anyone else. So, again, coming back to many people, say, when spouses are on a different page with practice of faith, for example, the more we try to enforce it, it's actually going to have the opposite effect, right? So how does anyone inspire someone of value, right? You basically live from it, and you are the ambassador. And when you live from your faith, that's the best you can do.
Perhaps that action can inspire the action that can come afterwards. I know the example, for example, of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, how they did wudu in front of the elder without telling him. It was through action and without embarrassing. That's such a powerful example, and we can use it for anybody really at all age, whether it is our partners or our children. It's just from that small yet powerful example, just doing it, like you're saying, sister, through action. I think it can save a lot of embarrassment as well. And perhaps empowering and encouraging and motivating. That's a big word we've been using today in relationships, how to motivate somebody's perhaps through your action, and they see that, and that could empower them as well to do it, inshallah. Well, thank you so much for all of the questions, and thank you, sister, for your beautiful, very deep, inspiring, and thorough answers. And alhamdulillah, we've gone on for almost 2 hours, so that's amazing.
Wow. That is amazing.
Flew by very quickly. And when you have that discussion around these important issues, especially during this time, it's nice to have that medium to be able to discuss, especially because we're craving for company these days, craving to connect with people. And so this is one way why we're doing these lives, is so that we have the opportunity for people to ask questions, share with us stories like we've seen, perhaps give hope and inspiration and answers, and through all the stories that we've heard today. So bless you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you so much. God bless you. And of course, blessings to you all on the milad of our awaited Imam, inshallah. Blessings for everybody, inshallah. And remember us in your du'as. Thank you so much, sister. Again, bless you. Inshallah, we can do another discussion like this in the future. And anybody who is looking for a therapist for resources, you can check out Sister Marzia's website at marziahassan.org. And she has daily wisdom that she sends out through emails, and there's all sorts of resources on her websites. So if anybody who is looking for a therapist, you have one right here who does therapy from her own home. And I'm assuming that is your office behind you, right?
Yes, it is.
Beautiful, mashallah. I'm looking at those books behind you, and I'm just, itching to reach out, grab a book and look through them.
It would be lovely to have you explore.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, sister. Bless you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Bless you.
Take care.
Assalamu alaikum. Khuda hafiz.